Namaste, yogis. You're listening to the Satya podcast, brought to you by 8 Limbs Wellness and Maya Yoga. Join us on the journey of balancing your inner and outer worlds, connecting with all living beings, becoming fully present, and embracing your true self. We'll explore Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for modern times. I'm your host, Jessie Molina. Thank you for joining. It's a beautiful Sunday, and I'm here with my co-host Kira Weinberger and Kino MacGregor. Kino MacGregor is an author and a certified yoga teacher in the Ashtanga yoga tradition. MacGregor is one of the only few yogis to have earned a certificate in India directly from founder K. Pattabhi Jois. Kino is also a life coach and PhD student in holistic health with a master's degree in interdisciplinary studies from New York University. After spending a major portion of her life engaged in development of her yoga practice and teaching, Kino returned to Miami Beach to create a space dedicated to her practice of yoga and holistic health. She and her husband, Tim Feldman, founded the Miami Life Center, where they teach classes and workshops. We are very honored to have her on our podcast today, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome to Satya Podcast. I'm Jessie Molina. This is
Kira Weinberger.
And Miss Kino MacGregor. We're lucky to have our guest today holding a wonderful workshop at Maya Yoga. And the concept of the podcast revolving around Satya. The starting question that we ask everyone that's going to be joining our podcast is your definition of Satya and how it relates on your mat, and then taking it off the mat into the current state of the world, especially in the Western world specifically.
Well, first I just wanted to say hi, everyone.
Oh, that's a great...
right? And thanks for joining, and thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're pretty honored, too.
Cool. The Satya is a really important concept in the yoga tradition. It's often translated into English as truthfulness, maintaining a sense of honesty and transparency. Well, if we take a look traditionally at the history of yoga, Satya is defined as, truth of speech, speaking and telling no lie. And the Yoga Sutras explain, if we look traditionally, what happens when you abide by 100% Satya. Your word has the power to create reality. So in the way that this is defined, I think, in Book 2 of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, where Patanjali says that those who are established in Satya, so Satya Pratishtayam, those who are established in Satya, whatever they say becomes true. And so this is kind of the amazing power to create reality.
Manifestation.
Exactly. So we think about that's really quite powerful, because we think about the idea of writing out intentions and affirmations and trying to manifest our dreams and stating all these things, but if we're not impeccable with our word and we're not truthful in what we say, and what if our word doesn't mean anything, then the power behind what words we speak over ourselves, over our bodies, then those words are not truthful, so they don't have that power to become true. On a more sort of personal level, I think that Satya, as it plays out, truthfulness plays out in the transparency of the body. So we have this idea that the mind can quite often say things that are untruthful, but the body is this kind of realm of innocence, this realm of innocent perception that simply reveals its truth. So if your body's tired, your body's tired. Your mind can somehow power through, and we can go through this. I mean, if we think about this, a really classic and easy example of this, we can think about jet lag. I experience that quite often because I travel a lot, and the body, it just sort of has a shut-off point, and the mind wants to power through. The mind wants to say, no, let's grab a cup of coffee. coffee, let's power through, let's do this, let's stay awake. And then when it's time to sleep, the mind is like, right, I should be sleeping now. And the body's like, listen, no, I'm on another time zone, like help, right? And so the body has this transparency. This is very much true on the mat. So I think that on a personal level, in terms of practice, Satya begins with honoring the messages and the truthfulness of what comes up from the body. So we become truthful with ourselves, and we're here, and so the body's tight. Don't try to make it flexible. Just observe, my body's tight. Rest in the truthfulness of that, the transparency, the honesty. Accept it, love it, let it be there. That's truth.
How would you combine that with ambition? There's a lot of paradoxical words within the context of Eastern philosophy, especially if you look at like the Tao Te Ching, especially. And I'm always wondering, in a state of yoga, combining your ambition to become more flexible, but still accepting the truth at the same time. And how do you balance those together? Do you embrace a state of ambitionlessness, or how can you have a healthy way of striving to higher levels without
attachment
Yes.
to that? I mean, that's, I feel like you see that a lot within, especially with Ashtanga, within postures.
Yeah.
People want the next posture so much that they push. And it's almost that, I don't want to say aggression, but it is an aggressive...
Yeah, it's not even within
Love it.
Ashtanga. People have goal poses
right.
that people work towards, So, someone wants to do, handstand.
I call them the trick poses or the party tricks.
Goal poses. Someone wants to get their leg behind the head.
Right.
Someone wants to do handstand press. And the Ashtanga, unfortunately, sometimes can be looked at as a linear path. So then sometimes people say, well, I need to get this so I can get the next one.
Right.
Right.
And then this begins to, again, shine light on what are our patterns, right? So what is that pattern? What's that about? You're onto something with non-attachment, but I'd like to qualify that a little bit in the sense that setting goals is not non-yogic, right? So the yogic goal of samadhi, right? So we have an intention to practice. It's not wrong, and that's not anti-yogic. And in fact, the classic story of the Gita, so the Bhagavad Gita, where the warrior Prince Arjuna is going into battle, and Krishna, who's the avatar of God, is teaching him, the yoga of the Gita. He says, practice, abhyasa, which is also focus, discipline, determination, and this would be goal. Set your goal. So Arjuna's an archer. If he doesn't set his goal, his target, he's not going to succeed. He would discredit his dharma. He would not be able to fulfill his life purpose if he didn't set his sights. But then Krishna says that in the moment you release the arrow, surrender it to me, turn it over to me, give it to me. It's not your job to determine whether or not the arrow will reach its target. It's my job. It's that thy will be done, God's will be done, not the individual person getting to decide, I'm going to force the arrow into its goal. So you can set your goal, okay, I want to get more flexible in my back. And then surrender to a long process, Maybe it never happens, but I'm going to try anyway. I kind of feel like the more you want something, the more you desire it, the more it means something to practice non-attachment. Because if it doesn't, if you don't want it really, really badly, then it doesn't really mean anything to turn it over. You're not turning anything over. You don't care about it. It was never yours. Do you know what I mean? So if you want your handstand really badly, you want your back bend really badly, or you want that relationship, you want to be, you want that perfect marriage really badly, you want that perfect job really, really badly. Our wanting, our craving comes from the idea that we think when we get that, we're going to be more whole, we're going to be better then. Right. And then the idea of surrendering that over to God, turning that over to a higher power, recenters wholeness within ourselves. And then from that place, we can then be conscious actors.
I mean, in itself, that's santosha.
The contentment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the active practice of contentment.
The first time, when I first started studying all of these, that was the one that kind of resonated for me so much because of my background, I had an eating disorder for a very long time, and it was I can keep losing weight, or I can keep doing this, or I can work out more, or I can do this, which is
if I'm just a little bit thinner,
which
then
is
I'm
how
gonna
I
feel
found
better about
yoga.
myself.
I found yoga through my eating disorder, and it's never going to get better if I keep wanting more. If I let it lay, and I'm okay with just being okay.
And in the
tends
Western world,
to release.
find here too, just because of the model of capitalism, we're taught to have immediate gratification. And specifically in the Ashtanga practice, what I find really beautiful about it is we peel the layers of the onion versus like a vinyasa. Not that there's anything wrong with vinyasa. I love vinyasa as well. But specifically in Ashtanga, what resonated with me was you return to the same poses. And then not only is it just the superficial layer, but you start to peel and peel and peel. And I think going back to the concept of what you were saying of santosha and contentment, we feel a need in this society to always be changing and consuming and having gratification. And if we can go back to santosha and contentment, even in our yoga practice, it deepens our understanding.
But that without the truth piece.
Right, right.
There's something that's kind of going around, I would say, the spiritual circles, particularly Western spiritual circles in the world, is that we have these catchphrases now like santosha, contentment, we should all be contentment, or ahimsa, we should all be nonviolent, and this sort of thing. What ends up happening is that we then use our spirituality to bypass reality. I mean, I find that I sometimes meet people that are sort of spouting the language of peace, but then you feel that there's a tension inside of them, so that they're in that state of santosha, but then maybe they step on your foot, and then if you say, hey, you stepped on my foot, and then they say, why do you have to be so negative? We are all just being in santosha, just practice contentment, just why are you not okay that I stepped on your foot, you know? So it begins to be this kind of weapon to spiritually bypass really relevant issues that I require a good sense of truthfulness. So I think santosha doesn't mean be okay with only the good, It means like be okay with the darkness when it arises, be okay with somebody that comes to you and they're in pain, and they might be in pain because of actions that you've taken or actions that you or even your culture, your country have been complicit in. Absolutely. And then you want to practice love and light in that moment. That's your job. So it's not now you are out there trying to police whether other people are practicing santosha or not. If you want to be rested firmly in the yogic values, it's your job to be okay with that they're not okay.
It's almost like denying the darkness is a form of repression, and it haunts you. Like Carl Jung, he talks about the shadow quite a bit. Yeah, and that's something I struggle with, is like allowing myself to feel the aspects of the negative reality around us, if it is negative, and then transforming it and allowing it to release. And even in your practice in certain poses,
absolutely,
like really, really resonated with your first talk about allowing yourself to feel uncomfortable, allowing yourself to feel vulnerable,
and pain.
Yeah,
I mean pain. Like feel your pain. Like get in, and it doesn't have. And people are afraid of feeling pain because, again, we've now anesthetized our yoga practice to the extent where never feel any pain. And so we've anesthetized our life. Oh, you should never feel any pain. Is that true? No, that's not true. Of course, we're all going to feel pain at some moment. We take the simple reality. We are born. We will die. Our parents, hopefully, if it works out, they will leave before we will.
Right.
We suffer. I lost my father last year, and it was, no, thank you. And it was suffering. The loss of a parent. I can't imagine the heartbreaking and staggering loss of losing a child. Right. And so there are people that suffering, like we suffer. The idea that we should never suffer, we should never feel pain. If we do a spiritual practice, we are trying to have tools so that we can face the inevitable pains of life here on earth with more grace, more love, more peace. And then this is within ourselves. It's our practice.
Well, Lisa Ashram used to say, and I know it's not hers, it's, but deepest injury, deepest insult, highest yoga.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's where you find... That's where you find yourself, and it's not from, walking in my first primary series class, walking in and being able to do everything. That wasn't where I found my yoga. It's the feelings that come up while I'm practicing, the feelings that...
Well, you face a difficulty.
And it is that moment of surrender, too.
and truthfulness, right? So we go back to Satya. Yep. So many people, they don't want to admit that they're not feeling good, and they don't want to admit that, hey, this particular Ashtanga is super confronting, and it's like they would rather not be in that space. I just had an experience of a student that had signed up for a Mysore style class. In the Mysore style class, you're going to memorize the poses and it's all quiet and you go into this, and there was a student that had signed up, but she didn't realize it was a Mysore class. She didn't know what that meant. She thought it was a guided class, and she went in and she was very, very upset, and we were just like, I'm so sorry, we'll give you a refund, and that wasn't enough. She needed to explain why she was upset, and everything was couched in all of this notion of self-identity, and that the Mysore style class had confronted and challenged that. So she would say things like, I'm extremely fit, I'm extremely intelligent, I know my body really well, I like when classes are led, I don't like silence is not good for me, I this, I that, and it went on and on. I was like, no problem, we'll give you a refund.
Yes.
Please. No, I this and I. And it was just this box of I. And then the truthfulness underneath it was that she was confronted. And it was a feeling of, discouragement. It was a feeling of failure. And she's someone that definitely identified with being a success.
Right.
So then we again have this whole truthfulness. Okay, so what's the practice about? And I was trying to explain to her, hey, this is your opportunity to feel all that. And she's like, no, I want my guided class. I was like, fine, okay, And ultimately, we gave her a refund, but it took a very long time for her to leave.
Calm down, obviously.
Yeah. But I feel like that's something that as a culture, the truthfulness, being willing to sit with our pain. If we look around, we are all suffering in all of our own ways, and so we look outside of ourselves as a solution for suffering. We look to someone else that can be a hero for us. That this person's. I believe, and we have this immense transference. We feel like crap. This person makes me feel good. So then, whether that person is boyfriend, girlfriend, best friend, celebrity, political leader, we have this immense transference. I belong to something now because this person's here. And then we assign, all of our worth to this person outside of ourselves. And we're essentially still telling the story that we're worthless.
And then we're also incredibly fearful of losing it.
Absolutely.
It causes attachment.
Yeah, and it causes us to take irrational actions.
Yeah,
to keep,
all kinds
to
of
hold on.
Hold on to that sense of identity, protect the identity, and we get, if the identity is threatened, then we are threatened because we've transferred our sense of self onto this other person, and we're essentially in this cycle of addiction. Now we're in love addiction.
Well, it's the opposite of hate is not love. It's just non-hate. You don't go from hate to love.
It's too big. Well, energetically, it's too big of a jump.
Right.
So you have the idea that, and this is very important, I think, for yogis to hear. Right? People have, in the yoga world, have a really oh, you're being so hateful. You have a lot of anger. Let's just try to shift that to joy right now. I'm like, that's a load of crap. Because honestly, if you can remember a time when you felt hopeless, depressed,
absolutely,
and then from there, anger is a little bit strong. It brings you up out of the dark hole of depression. I know depression really well, and when you're angry about something, you're you're less of a risk to yourself than when you're deeply depressed. You're doing something. You're on fire. You're
Motivation.
there. You're okay. You're fighting. We're there. I mean, don't stay there forever. But you can't deny that. That's again non-truthfulness. Satya, I am angry. I am angry.
Right.
When you can sit with that within yourself, then somebody comes to you and then they say, I am angry, and you say, yes, you are, rather than, oh, you shouldn't be. Because you have to be okay with your own anger.
Yeah, and
then
especially
you're okay with someone else's anger. One of the most inspiring moments of sort of public sitting with anger was the former President Barack Obama. I watched him in a rally, and there was people so angry, and they were angry about gun violence. They were angry that he hadn't done more, and they were heckling him. And the security guards came over, get them out, and he stopped them. He said, no, they have a right to be here, and I want to hear what they have to say. And he listened to them, and they were angry, and he said, you're angry, and I understand that, and I'm angry about it too. And it was just this really powerful sitting with, and I just so admired that, and I felt like, wow, because so many times we see someone's anger and blame. They were blaming him, and he didn't take any of it on, and it was amazing.
And then empathy versus sympathy. They say empathy is when you don't necessarily have to create a solution per se, but you're like, I'm here with you.
Yeah. where do we go from anger? So this is raw, unprocessed anger. Sit with it for a little bit, but then, like any other emotion, if you practice it too much, then it begins to be like your vibration.
If it sticks.
So we don't want it to stick, but you want to feel it as much as you need to feel it so that you can move on. What's after anger? Then we feel, then maybe we get bored, then we're bored. Oh, it's this again. Then humor starts to be an antidote to anger. Then from there, we start to feel hopefulness, from hopefulness. Then we start to think about more positive thoughts. And then eventually we move into joy, then eventually we move into love.
It's a spectrum. It's just like it's colors. I mean,
I was going through a meditation session, and I thought a really wonderful way that he brought up the idea of the emotions and not denying what you feel as you feel it was like looking at like a 4 or 5-year-old child. As we grow up, we have social imprints of how we're supposed to behave and the architecture of it, but at the same time, those teach us to repress. And so if you look at a child, like he'll have a bout of anger, and then all of a sudden, 2 minutes later, he'll have joy. Now, the child doesn't have recognition of the effect of his behavior on others, so he may just be like having that anger towards his little brother or something like that. But as we develop and mature, we have the ability to feel it and still be non-harming.
Right, exactly.
At the same time.
Yeah.
Which is powerful. I mean, I dealt with lots of repression from like childhood trauma, and then later on, literally like 10 years later, is when I started feeling the emotion.
Process.
So I was like, I didn't even remember that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a practice of not pushing it down.
And trauma survivors, myself included, have a very problematic relationship to pain and discomfort and boundaries being overstepped especially, and the ability to say no, particularly if it's sexual trauma of some type. So then the ability to say no, or even to register that this was something that was off, can take months. So then you're in a conversation and someone oversteps your boundary. I mean, this happened to me in a conversation. I was speaking with a man. I expressed my discomfort about the subject that we were speaking about, and he proceeded to just keep talking and talking and talking and talking about it. I kept trying to kind of elegantly change the conversation, and then it took so much time. It finally ended, but it took me months to realize that I felt that my boundaries were violated, and I felt that I was treated disrespectfully, and I felt that it was an extremely aggressive conversation, and I tried to say no numerous times, and this person wouldn't listen to my no. And what was interesting was immediately after, I tried to tell the story to myself that it was okay,
right?
Which is the sort of trauma survivor kind of freeze experience. It was just
the freeze.
It didn't happen. Nothing was wrong. It didn't happen.
Right.
It didn't happen. It was fine. Nothing happened. Like 3 months later, I was like, that was not okay.
Right. Yeah.
And I was like, it came to my mind, and I was like, wait a minute, that was not okay. I said no numerous times, and the response was to ignore my no and proceed and basically yell at me. That was not okay.
And then the anger.
Yeah, and then the anger. Then I felt it took all that time for me to realize that, and then feel the anger, and then express the anger, process it, and then come to a place of, okay, some sort of hopefulness about it. So I find that that's really interesting because, we try to maintain truthfulness, right? But we don't always see to the depth because maybe we're not ready. We have a conditioned response to trauma. So when we register trauma, it activates our old trauma cycle in the limbic brain, in the amygdala that's in that sort of reptilian brain, and the emotional brain that's in there. Then we're back into that pattern, and maybe our childhood trauma took 10 years for us to process. So then we made a casual everyday trauma. Okay, maybe it takes now 1 year. Then slowly we do more practice. We get better. It takes 3 months. Then eventually, you can get the feeling that maybe it's in the present moment. Maybe I have a very hard time. Yeah, I'm lucky for me if it's within 24 hours. So the interesting thing with trauma, and I actually just experienced something like this where I had something that triggered kind of my trauma response, and what I realized is that it was so disturbing. It's just kind of, it's a sort of benign experience. It was nothing that was wrong. There was a mix-up with my Airbnb, and as I was going to bed, a man had the key to where I was staying and walked in. and it was very disturbing.
Right.
But in my response was like, try to problem solve, and I asked them if he needed help finding another place to stay and this sort of thing. And then he left, and instead of registering that, hey, I just felt violated. Hey, like I was in bed, like wearing only a t-shirt, and then a man is walking into where I'm staying, and realizing that, hey, I don't feel safe here. Every sound now that when the air conditioning turns on, the door jiggles, and I'm like, is someone else? Like what's going on? Right. And I didn't even register that was going on in my nervous system. But I started like just going around and answering emails, and then the quality that I was even speaking with and interacting with just had like a tinge of kind of not okay. So like what you were talking about, I was acting out in all these different ways. And then I realized something is when I finally was like, okay, I'm just going to sit with myself for a little bit and chill. I realized that my body is actually shaking. I actually had, my arm was uncontrollably shaking. My body was actually shaking. And I was just like, oh, I need to sit with this for a little bit. So when I sat with it, I was uncontrollably shaking for a little while, and I started to cry. And then it was sort of the processing of that I realized, oh, this activated a trauma response in me. And so all the interactions that I had in between from when it happened until I went through the shaking and the cried and felt it were just whacked.
But I think the longer you avoid it, I mean, there's reasons why we attract the same situations over and over again until we confront it.
Right.
And so that can either be enlightening once you do confront it, or it can continue to chase you, possibly even between lifetimes.
For sure. So there's people that react very strongly to the notion of reincarnation. So even if you take that off the table, we're the recipients of thousands of generations of DNA. Right? So we could even take out the idea of reincarnation and just say the patterns have been worked in humanity as a whole for thousands of years. Right. We are the recipients of, exactly. Or even just in our DNA. Right? So the DNA, like that DNA that had that particular proclivity that survived. Right. Which ones were those? Let's look at our history. We have a history of oppression of the weak, the capitalist consumption and the oppression of marginalized groups. And if we look at this, we're instruments, particularly cultures and people in positions of power and privilege in the world are executors of vast injustices. And we're the recipients of that DNA. Yeah. And so I think we need to look no further than our history, whether we come from a marginalized group ourselves, whether we're a person of color, whether we're an indigenous community, whether we are recipients of the DNA of privilege. It's all our heritage. It's all our ancestry, and we need to take a look at it. And so we can think about that, as patterns that are in our mind and in our body, and we can work with them.
We all are different bodies, and we all come from points of different we look differently, we react differently in the world, and that sense of Satya. And in my practice, when I approach it, I mean, how do you avoid the self-judgment and not deny the ego, but surpass the ego in your practice?
Having a perspective of non-judgment is a practice. When your judgment is there, you can't say, no, I'm judging is bad. Then we have a new judgment about our judgments. You know what I mean?
Right.
So to be non-judgmental, we have to first admit, recognize that we're judging, and then also accept the judgment. So here I am, and I'm speaking negatively about my body. Right? So body negativity is present. So we just practice observing the judgment. So I think the witnessing is the beginning. And then from the witnessing, then we can slowly, from a point of neutrality, potentially think other thoughts. And so I think we have to start with the pure witness, the innocent perception. The judgment is judgment. So we observe the judgment. And that's a practice. It's a discipline. Because you can easily go into, here I go again. I can't believe it. So many years. Why don't I love my body already? Right. We go into that. But no, just observe. Body hatred is present.
Or comparison.
I wish I was as tall as she is. Oh, I wish I would have started yoga when I was younger. I wish I was more flexible.
I hear that.
Yeah. And then I think the honest recognition of difference is important as well. So then you recognize, here I am at this particular place, and in my life, I started yoga when I was a certain age, and I'm this flexible, and to make peace with it, to really do the work of making peace with it. And so there's some conscious things we can do about making peace with it, which is when you have your judgmental thought after you've witnessed it, then then you can start to be inquisitive about it. You know, is it true?
Curiosity.
Yeah. You know, can I turn the thought around? So instead of, I hate my body, I wish it was different, can I find a different thought? I'm grateful that I have a body with 4 working limbs.
Right.
Can we find something? But I wanted to say something about the Advaita Vedanta, which is an interesting thing, because some people start sort of a cursory read of the Advaita Vedanta, Advaita philosophy, the non-dual philosophy, and then sort of take that on as we're all one, and so we should all be one, and we're all equal, and I don't see race and color and all that sort of stuff. So I'm colorblind, and because I believe in Advaita Vedanta, and unfortunately, I think that's a little bit of a superficial reading of the depth of that philosophy. So what the Advaita philosophy often says is that, yes, there is oneness in the world. However, unless you're living in the true communion of oneness moment to moment, you've got to operate in duality. So there might be times when you slide into recognition of oneness, and that's there for a moment, but day to day, moment to moment, the reality is duality. The reality is materiality. We're in the material world. Here we are. So then to say that you're operating from Advaita Vedanta from that shimmering grand oneness of the universe, when the reality is that you're there in your mind with all your thoughts, and you're there, you know, you're very much in the state of duality. That's a lie, and it's untruthful. You know, and I think that's something that's very very prevalent now in circles of social justice, where, you know, we have the response of well-intentioned, well-meaning people to say, well, I don't see race, class, color, you know, I don't see differences. We're all equal. And then there's the corollary response, which is, hey, you know, to say that you're colorblind denies my lived experience as a person of color. You know,
right?
And when you say that, you say we're all equal. You know what? We're not. And if someone's never done an exercise in privilege, and to understand privilege, and to really see, hey, sure, in the spirit we are all equal in that shimmering oneness, but in the material world there are certain things that make us different in the size and shape of our body. You know, economic background, family background, the color of our skin. You know, we can't understand the lived experience of someone that isn't ourselves. We can try, we can listen, we can be educated, but to say, hey, we're all one, we're all the same. You know, we've been talking a lot about responses to trauma. So here we are, and we've experienced our own traumas, and that's impacted us. Well, someone that never experienced a trauma, they're in a different place. So then they have a different response to pain. They're going to go through a different thing, and that's their experience. But they're going to be, you could say that they have a privilege, you know, to go through life having never experienced that. They don't know what it's like to have been violated, to have been assaulted. You know, they don't know that. So in many ways, they're on a, you know, that's a privilege. And then to say, hey, we're all equal. You know, why aren't you just over? It's almost like saying, why aren't you just over your trauma? I don't get it. So I think there's a very real need in spiritual circles to accept and embrace the beauty of that shimmering oneness, the universal God consciousness that's there, and to trust in that, while at the same time to really still love, honor, recognize, and validate the realities of the material world.
How do you personally find your contentment? Because you've reached a level of fame, you know, in your Ashtanga practice, and I'm sure developing a sacred space and authenticity, and like relationship wise, like with your husband and your close friends, like how do you personally balance that? Is it your meditation practice?
Well, I mean, for me, very much so. My meditation practice. I think that without my meditation practice, I would not have the ability to really straddle all the different worlds that I do. And I feel like I'm constantly a student. You know, I'm just continually learning. I'm continually along the path. I've got my lessons. I stumble. I fall. I pick myself back up again, and I keep going. And I hope that each time I, you know, face a lesson, I really hope for the grace to really learn that lesson, so I don't have to repeat it again. And you know, I just believe in staying committed to being a student more than anything else.
The beginner's mind. Well, I mean, what I love personally about all aspects of yoga, the deeper philosophies of it, you just open one door and
just
15 more
18 more doors,
and
yeah.
just, you open those doors and it's just completely, especially the wide variety of the different yogas of the practices, from tantra to bhakti to everything. Well, we want to thank you so much for your time, Kino. We appreciate it, and your workshop has been enlightening. My arms have been sore all day long. My boyfriend was actually holding my hand while I was walking, and he was like, "What's wrong with your arm?" It was like so solid. So I was like, "Oh, relax."
Yeah, like I'm thinking about stabilizing my core muscles of the shoulder girdle.
I'm protracting.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay?
I'm protracting and retracting and protracting. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but it was wonderful.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Wonderful. It's been my pleasure. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in to the Satya podcast. Subscribe through iTunes for more enlightening and introspective interviews. This podcast is a labor of love, and if you would like to donate or contact us about sponsorship, please check out our link in the notes under the episode in iTunes. And while you're there, please show your support by leaving a review as well. Music used in this podcast is by the talented Amado Espinoza. Feel free to contact me with questions at jessemolina at 8limbswellness.com, JESSEMOLINA at 8limbswellness.com, and check out our websites, mayayoga.com and 8limbswellness.com. Thank you for listening. Namaste.